So today what I want to talk about is this Asian century. So it's a little bit about the shift of power from Europe and the USA to Asia. And that's it's something that's starting to happen. It's happening a lot already. And I want to share with you some ideas I want to share with you what's happening, and then perhaps some things that you can do to take away and put into practice in your own organization to take advantage of the opportunity, and of course to be aware of the threats and the risks as well. But there's some great opportunities, and in the next half hour, I'll go through some of those for you. So it's very much about me presenting some information. I'd love you to get some ideas of your own that you can take away. In fact, if we're looking at ideas, I'd like you to think about the ideas in three areas. So if you think about the ideas that you're going to capture today, think about doing them in three ways. So think of things that you get, wow, I really need to stop everything that I'm doing and do something right now, today or tomorrow. And I'm going to put that into practice, whatever it is. It might be something that's going to take a little bit longer. So it might be in the next couple of weeks you're going to do something. Or you might find something that's a little bit bigger, but don't discard it. Think of it as a 90-day project. So write down everything that you can, and then I'll ask at the end what ideas you had and whether they turned out to be immediate, slightly short term, or whether they're going to be a 90-day project for you. Okay, so to get started, I've got a little bit of a puzzle for you. And so this is a puzzle where I've got these four cards here. Two of them, numbers 1 and 3, you can see the back, and 2 and 4, you can see the front. And let's say I make this statement. And the statement is that every red-backed card has a dragon on the other side. Now, I'm not telling you whether that statement's true or false, but I'm going to give you the chance to turn over any number of cards to find out whether that statement's true. And I'd like to know which cards would you turn over to be able to say whether that statement's true or false. Now, obviously, you can turn over all four, and then you'll be able to find out because you'll be able to see the front and back of all the cards if you turn them all over. But what's the minimum number of cards you need to turn over, and which ones would they be? So if you'd like to, in the question box, I'm really keen to see which cards you would turn over to find out whether that statement is true or false. So James says 3 and 4. Bruce says 1 and 4. Matt says 1 and 4. Anne says 1 and 4. Good, I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, so most people are going for 1 and 4, which is good. All right, so every red-backed card has a dragon on the other side. I can tell you that nobody has got the right answer. So if you'd like to take another guess for the people who have answered, I'm very happy to take a few other guesses. Just 1, 2. All right. So let me show you. Let me talk you through the logic of this. So yes, almost everybody said you need to turn over number 1 because that's right. Because that card there, you need to know whether it's got a dragon on the other side to find out whether it's true. The second card you turn over is not number 3 because that's another logical one. You don't need to turn that one over because we don't care about blue-backed cards. But you also don't care about number 4. Because it doesn't matter what color the back is, it really doesn't make a difference because that doesn't help us with that statement. So even if it's got a blue back, it doesn't that doesn't make that statement true or false. And whether it's got a red back doesn't help make that statement true or false either. The only other one you need to turn over is actually 2. So you can get by turning over just these 2 cards, 1 and 2. 1, because you need to find out whether the red back card does have a dragon, and 2, because you need to find out whether the back of this card is red. And if it is, then the statement is false. So the correct answer is 1 and 2. So those are the only 2 you need to turn over to find out whether that statement's true or not. Now, the reason I'm sharing that with you is because lots of people get the 1 correct because the words red-backed appear, but they don't necessarily figure out this other one here. And perhaps there's a missed opportunity there because of what you can't see. We often ignore or discount what we can't see. So that's, if you like, my metaphor for what's coming up today in today's webinar. I want to share with you perhaps some things you didn't know or you weren't aware of about the world and the way it's changing. James says, okay, riddles before coffee. Yes, that's right. LOL, absolutely right. So I agree. That's why I had my coffee earlier. We're actually going to talk a little bit about coffee a little bit later on. Okay, so let me show you the broad brush picture of how the world's changed, and this is on a very global scale before we start looking at Asia. So if we look at now, and for most of the last century, the world's economy was powered by 7 countries here. So you probably You can probably recognize most of them, Canada and the USA. In Europe, you had the UK, France, Italy, and Germany, and Japan. This, of course, we know as the G7. But PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, predicts that by 2030, that is going to shift. And in fact, the economic power of those 7 countries is going to be overtaken by these emerging economies, or the E7, in the next 15 years. So the countries that we've got there are the countries you probably guess some of them. So Brazil, Mexico. In Asia, we've got India and China and Indonesia, and then Russia and Turkey. So that's not that far away. 2050, from 2015 to 2030 is only 15 years. And if we look ahead another 15 years, when you look at the power of the G7 has disappeared, we're going to have another 7 countries, which are the frontier markets, or the F7, which are also going to have strong economic power in the world. And they're countries like Colombia, and Morocco, Nigeria. Again, in Asia, we've got Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Vietnam, and Peru over in South America. So just think about what the world's going to look like in our lifetime. That economic power is going to have shifted. And if you think about those 21 countries where there's the G7, which will have lost power, or the E7, which will take power soon, economic power, and then the F7 coming up, where does Australia fit within that? Because it's obviously not one of those countries, but it does have a role to play in the world. And I know I've got people from all around the world here on today's webinar, but most of them are here in Australia. So let's look at specifically where Australia fits in that. Okay, let me ask you about another country. If I was to ask you, and I won't ask you to type this in the question box because it's pretty obvious, which country is represented by watches, chocolate, cheese, and cuckoo clocks, the answer is obviously Switzerland. And some people have referred to Australia as the Switzerland of Asia. And it's actually not a bad analogy. So if you think about anywhere in the world that you could live, if you're a global citizen and you could live anywhere, leaving aside family and other issues which might draw you to a particular area, and you could choose anywhere in the world to live, Australia looks pretty attractive. We've got a democratic government. You'd want a place with a strong economy, with a pretty stable currency and good financial markets, and a whole host of other things. You'd want somewhere English speaking because that's the lingua franca of the business world at the moment, and so on. And Australia, our tiny little continent, is one of the most attractive places to live, provided that we can adapt to what's happening in our changing world. And just like Switzerland's adapted, so it's been famous for these things, but in fact some of its exports, watches are still one of its main exports, but we also have things like gold, pharmaceuticals, and vaccines are now some of Switzerland's greatest exports. So we as Australians can adapt and can take advantage of these opportunities if we do take advantage of them and recognize them. A couple of centuries ago, Napoleon Bonaparte said this, China is a sleeping giant, let her sleep, for when she wakes, she will move the world. And that's absolutely right. And if anything, the only thing that Napoleon got wrong was that it's not just China, but it's the Asia in general is going to be the sleeping giant that's awoken. All right, so that's a little bit of the broad brush picture. Let's look at some of the details. So our world now has changed in 3 big ways. It's fast, it's flat, and it's free. So I talk about this to many audiences, to many of my clients, and we'll look at specifically what that means today. So fast means that our world is moving faster than before. Technology is faster, we have innovation moving faster, and change is faster than ever before. Our world is flat because we've broken down hierarchies. We've got a much more customer-centric world. Customers have more power. Employees have more power. Globalization has made our world a lot smaller. And of course, social media has given us a lot more power. And things that used to cost a lot now cost a lot less because they're digital, because we can collaborate, and because of the buying power of people around the world. So today, if we're looking at this Asian century, I don't want to talk about every one of those things in these boxes here, but let's look at specifically innovation. Let's look at global, obviously, because that's this Asian century is how it's going to affect Australia, and the buying power of Asia. So we could talk about a lot of things, but let's look at these things specifically. Okay, so I'm really interested to know what you are interested in Asia or why you're interested in Asia. So what is it that makes you interested and why you're here today? So I've got a little poll here. So people who haven't done polls in webinars before, the poll should be coming up on your screen now. And all you got to do is answer tick one of the boxes. In fact, in this one, you can tick more than one box because you might be interested in more than one of these areas. And yeah, and I'll just leave it open for a few seconds and give people the chance to vote. So people are voting now. So, there's some choices. Are you expanding into Asia? Are you outsourcing some of your work? Are you doing any sort of partnerships with Asian businesses? Are you more interested? Are you just here out of interest or other? And if you've got some other reason for being here, then please just type it in the question box and I'll just read it out. Polls are anonymous, by the way. So if you type in here, I'll keep this anonymous as well. Okay, so most people have answered, so I'm just going to keep it open for another couple of seconds, and then we'll see the results. Okay, good. Thank you everyone for voting so quickly. Let me show you the results. Okay, so most people here are just to understand a little bit more about globalization, but I'm really interested to see that there's some people who are interested in expanding into Asia and partnering with Asia as well, which is fantastic. So I hope they'll give you some insights into what's happening so that you'll get some ideas on how you can do those sort of things like expanding into Asia, partnering with Asia. I'm really interested that only a few people are doing outsourcing to Asia. I would recommend that that's one of the easiest ways to get started, even if it's outsourcing just small tasks to the Philippines or to China or to India, getting your books printed somewhere else or getting products created or services provided in other parts of the world, particularly in Asia. Okay, so let's look at these three areas, and I've got a couple of ideas in each one. We're not going to go through this in a lot of detail because we've only got limited time, but I think it will be interesting for just to give you some ideas about where we're heading. I see a question from Marie. So Marie says, what are the risks in working in Asia? Read business stuff about the differences in legal systems, number of people being caught up in the systems and ending up in big trouble. Yeah, that's right, Marie. And in fact, what a lot of people do when they're looking at doing business in Asia is they partner with the local Asian partners to make that work. There are a couple of people that I want to give a shout out to. In fact, I'll do that at the end of the webinar, people that you can work with if you're looking at doing some of this work in Asia. Okay, so the first thing is let's look at innovation because we see a lot of innovation happening, but a lot of countries in Asia aren't really seen as innovative countries, and you don't see much of the leading innovation coming out of Asia. But Asians are very, very innovative, and there's a bit of a perception, especially with a country like China, that's a communist country, that you think that they're not that innovative, but actually they are. I went to university at the University of Western Australia, and they have a mentoring program, and every year they ask graduates whether they'd like to mentor people who are undergraduates and who are just about to graduate. And a couple of years ago, I was involved in this program, and the person that I was mentoring, he was a Chinese student who was studying in at the University of Western Australia, and he was planning to go back to China and start a business after he graduated. And he said to me, it's really easy to set up a business in China because it's very easy to find 1,000 customers. So he said, we Chinese are very, very entrepreneurial because it's very easy to set up a business, to test it and try it out. And there are companies here or organizations or individuals who'd love to be able to just open up a business and easily find 1,000 customers to get going, to start with the test market. But people are really innovative, partly because the people are there. And we'll see a little bit more about the numbers there. But the second reason they're innovative is because sometimes they just need to be. And in India, there's this idea called Jugaad or Jugaad innovation, which in the Western world, we call it hacking or life hacking. And the idea is innovating because of limited resources, because you just simply don't have the resources available, the money, the time, the technology to do what you can. So you just create anything you can create what you can with what you've got. This is an example of a cart that's powered by a water pump. And this was somebody who created this in India, simply because that's the only way they could do it. Going back to my roots, I was born in Sri Lanka, and a couple of years ago when I went back to Sri Lanka, I like to think that I tapped into those innovative roots there, and I helped in my aunt's house. I helped her to get an electric fan working by this doesn't look very innovative, but I was able to, down here, by wedging a little bit of cardboard in between the plug and the socket, and that made the connection work. Now, here in Australia, you'd be horrified if you did something like that, but that's the sort of innovation that happens in Asia simply because it needs to be done. So it's like necessity is the mother of innovation, and absolutely is that Asians are highly, highly innovative people. Not only for the not only in those ways, but one of the other things that happens with countries that we think of as developing nations is that they don't have the infrastructure that we already have, that we have here, which isn't always a bad thing. So, for example, in Australia, we have a very strong banking structure and a legacy banking structure. In some of these developing nations, they don't have that, but it also means that they don't have stuff that holds them back. So, for example, here in India, there's a bank that lets you just tweet. It takes advantage of Twitter, so you can tweet money to other people, to other Indians. Now, you can imagine doing that in Australia. There'd be so many regulations, so much bureaucracy, so much red tape and paperwork to get through before you can do that, that it just wouldn't get off the ground. But in some Asian countries, it does, simply because that we don't have that they don't have that legacy. They leapfrog, and they're not caught by that the sunk costs of infrastructure that's already there. Another country, another example is South Korea, which has a very, very high use of mobile phones. Vietnam's another country which has a very high use of mobile phones. They adopted them much faster than we did, simply because they didn't have landline phones as part of their basic infrastructure. So when mobiles came along, it was their chance to have a telephone. So they jumped on the bandwagon very, very quickly, much faster than we did. Okay, so that's a couple of examples of innovation. Let me just stop now and see if there's any questions here. So in fact, I'll turn my webcam on for questions. Okay, so Eve says you mentioned printing in Asia. Are there copyright issues? So yes, there's two parts to that question, Eve. So one is that a lot of Asian countries, as many of us know, have very different attitudes towards copyright than we do in the Western world. And it simply is that they may not have signed up to the same copyright law, so we think they're breaching copyright. In fact, they haven't got the same law, so they don't see copyright the same way. I should say that many people, many young Westerners on social media have the same view. They don't see images as automatically being copyright or material as automatically being copyright. They're happy to share it even without permission from the copyright holders. I think your question, Eve, may be more related to what I asked about. If you're printing, for example, books in Asia, then there are a lot of people, a lot of publishers who send their book off for printing in China, and there is a risk that people will then take copies of that book. In fact, I found that one of my books has been copied and was available for download, for PDF download, somewhere on some international website. And there's not much you can do about that. Yeah, I mean, you can try and chase it down, but I don't think it's worth the trouble. It is one of those things that happens when we're working in a global marketplace. So yeah, absolutely, it is an issue. It is an issue to consider. But I wouldn't stop. I wouldn't stop sending material off to Asia to be printed. It's just one of the risks that's going to happen, whether or not you do it. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming in. So, see. So Marie's question about the risk to working in Asia. Let me do the shout outs now. There are a couple of people I'd recommend. I think Tricia is actually on this call. So Tricia Carter helps people with cultural intelligence and understanding different cultures, especially in a commercial environment. So contact Tricia if you want some help in that area. David Thomas, who runs a business called Think Global, helps people, particularly companies who want to go offshore. He runs tours through Asia to help, and with commercial tours. He's fantastic with that. Stacey Martin, who works for the National Australia Bank, but is an absolute thought leader in Asia as well. I don't know whether Stacey's here on this webinar. I know that she was registered for it, but yeah, it's absolutely, if you want to do business in Asia, if you want to partner in Asia, there's some people who can help you out with that. Okay, Anne says that she's had the same experience, that the book's available, but no royalty to herself. Yeah, that's right. And it's one of the things. It's one of the things of doing business in a global environment now. It happens, whether you like it or not. Okay, let's continue. So the second area is that our world's become flat. So we've broken down hierarchies and we've broken down barriers between companies and countries. And this is the Bradman Museum in Bowral. I went there about 10 years ago. I think it's one of those things that it's a pilgrimage that every Australian should do, but maybe that's just my opinion. And when Don Bradman died, I remember seeing a news report at the time that said that there were more Indians who mourned the loss of Don Bradman than Australians. And I mentioned that to my brother, and he said, yeah, that's true, but there are more Indians who pretty much do anything than Australians. And it's absolutely right. And part of what happens in this flat world is that with Asia, the the challenge is, or part of what you see, is that the numbers are so big. So, for example, China, because it has more than 1 billion people, has a $16 trillion economy, almost as much as the USA. India has almost 1 billion phone users. So the adoption rate is as high as it is in some other countries, but because of the sheer numbers, we've got incredible numbers. Philippines is the fifth largest English-speaking country. The biggest are the USA, the UK, India and Pakistan, and then the Philippines. So if you're looking for outsourcing, the Philippines has become one of the biggest outsourcing hubs in the world for people from Western English-speaking countries, because there are so many people in the Philippines who grew up speaking English. English is, in fact, their native tongue rather than any other language. So that's one of the reasons, because you've got such big big populations in these countries, that they really make a significant difference. For example, if you look at how big China is, you may have seen this report in the Sydney Morning Herald just earlier this week that said that China is now creating a new mega city to ease the strain on Beijing, which I thought was interesting. I thought it was a really interesting report, but this was the thing that really caught my eye. So Beijing is going to limit its population to 23 million people. In other words, Beijing is going to limit its population to the same size as all of Australia. So those are the sort of numbers that we're looking at when we're looking at Asia, and it's not only China, but it's other countries in Asia as well. Okay, so I've got a little bit of a quiz for you here, and I haven't yet got to the one where I'm going to give away a book, but I might actually give away 2 books, so we'll do it for this one as well. So let's look at Australia as a tourist destination, as a tourism market. So there are 7 countries, or these are the top 1, 2, 3, 4, I think about the 10, and I've listed them in a roughly alphabetical order of the top 10 countries in terms of tourism value to Australia in billions of dollars. So the amount that people spend in these countries, in Australia, tourists from those countries spend in Australia in billions of dollars. So I'm going to ask you to guess which are the top 3. So if you do it in the question box, which are the top 3? You don't have to get them in order. Just do it any that you think are the top 3. Just write down in the question box the 3 that you think are the top 3. I'll keep this anonymous, but we'll see but I'll read out some of the answers that are coming in. Eve says, sorry, she didn't mean for me to mention that my book's free online. I don't mind that. That's quite okay. Okay, so I see people going China, UK, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, USA, UK, Singapore, China, USA, Malaysia. Okay, so a couple of people have got 2 out of 3, which is really good. Okay, so let me share the answers. Thank you everyone for answering so quickly. There's a range of answers here, which is really interesting, which is really good. So here are the top 2. So 2 of the top 3 are the usual suspects. The USA and the UK are still very high very high tourist numbers, and also very high tourist spends. Then there's a whole bunch of other Asian countries. In fact, Asia, 6 of the top 10 are Asian countries. If you see the countries listed there, who do spend quite a bit. So not as much as the UK and UK and the USA, but still significant amounts, like billions of dollars. Canada and Germany are in there as well, and the number one tourist spend in Australia is from China, and you can see how that dwarfs some of the other numbers there. So the top 3 are the USA, the UK, and China in that order. So there are organizations that are tapping into that. The Tangalooma Island Resort, for example, just off close to Brisbane, has shifted. It used to be 80% domestic tourists and 20% international, but now it's pretty much 50-50. And one of the things they've done is they've partnered with retail outlets who have the same demographic to do their marketing for them, so that they get, because they're now attracting a lot of international tourists, mainly a lot of them from China as well. RMIT University, so getting away from tourism but looking at education, education is very big in Asia, and international education is very big in Australia as well. RMIT, based in Victoria, has 70,000 students, but almost half of them are international students, and many of those are from, or most of those are from Asia. And in fact, like many Australian universities, they even have offshore students as well. So they have campuses in other countries, mostly in Asian countries. Okay, so that's a very big part of what happens. What's happening now, just with the sheer numbers of the populations of some of these Asian countries. So there's a huge potential to be able to tap into those markets. Okay, the third thing that I want to talk about is looking at the buying power of some of these nations in Asia. So the world is free, but it also means that there's huge opportunities to tap into that. So here's another question where I'm going to give away a copy of my book. Question: why are there more KFCs than McDonald's in China? So type in what the answer that you think is right. And I'll give away a copy of my book to somebody if you get the right answer. There's some people here who've been to my conferences, and you know that I've asked that question there, so you might have the answer. You might know the answer. Yeah, okay, so some people have got the answer. Alan was the one who got it first, because chicken is cheaper than beef. So at the moment, there are not many people in China who can afford beef because it's more expensive, but that's changing. And the world's middle class is shifting. So if a few years ago, not so long ago, Asia had still 28% is nothing to sneeze at, but 28% of the world's middle class. Very soon, within the next couple of decades, in Asia, 2 out of 3 of the middle class people classified as middle class in the world are going to be in Asia. And there's a perception, there's a stereotype that a lot of Asian people are poor, which is true. However, people are coming out of poverty quite fast. And in East Asia, there are 1 million people a week who are coming out of poverty. So people are, like Asian countries, are really lifting their standards. And so countries like China are becoming richer, and these are ordinary people in China who are becoming richer. So for countries like Australia who are exporting beef, there's going to be more Chinese who are going to be buying beef. There are more Chinese who are going to be investing their hard-earned money in countries like Australia, because they see it as a stable financial market, a great place to invest. And as we've seen already, tourism is also increasing. Now, that also raises some questions like foreign investment, and there's some concerns about foreign investment. I was speaking at a conference last week in Bunbury, looking at the southwest of Australia and their blueprint for the future. And there's some innovative ideas to address some of these challenges about whether foreign investment is bad. So one idea is maybe Australian farmers own the land, but maybe foreign investors own the cattle. And maybe that's a way that you can allow foreign investment, but limit it and make sure that it doesn't mean that we get overrun by foreign investment. So there are things that you can do. Okay, so let's look at, in fact, let me stop now and see if there's any other questions coming in, and I'd be happy to answer them. So we looked at these 3 areas about the world becoming fast, flat, and free, and how you're going to take advantage of them. Okay, so any tips about moving into Asia? So I think this question here is about. So I'm not quite sure if there's a question about tourism or it's a question about business. So let's assume it's a question about business. If you're looking at moving into Asia, then I reckon, as I said earlier, a lot of what people do is they partner with with local companies. In fact, in Vietnam, it's the law. You can't, an international can't work in Vietnam unless you partner with a local agent. But that's happening a lot more, even in other countries, that you partner with someone local. As I mentioned earlier, David Thomas is a great person who will help you with offshoring and moving into, if you think of moving into Asia. David says, Australia is a really tough market because we've only got 20 and a fraction million people. So if you can make it here, you can make it elsewhere. And so he says that working in other markets with bigger populations is easier, provided you know the right way to do it locally. Okay. Is partnering the case for taking education into Asia? Yes and no. So Jeanette's asking the question about is partnering the case for taking education into Asia? There are a couple of ways of doing that, Jeanette. And so definitely one way is if you want to have a local presence, then you might obviously there are rules about how to set up campuses overseas. But in fact, in one of the future webinars that I'll be running in this series, I'll be talking about how education has changed and it no longer needs to be done in the classroom, but you can do online education, and it's very big at the moment. And also, what a lot of Australian tertiary institutions are doing is they're bringing Asian students, as we know, like attracting Asian students here. So Jeanette, I know you, and you're not looking, and I know you're not working for any university necessarily. So I think you'd look at perhaps providing some of your education online, and we'll talk about that in a future webinar as well. Okay, Jeanette says thanks, and okay, so let me continue. And just to finish off, I'm not going to give you any specific advice, but I'm going to give you some broad things that you can do to stay competitive in this Asian century. So the first thing is to innovate. So do things differently so that you're not competing with the Asian market. The second thing is to specialize. So you can either offer a premium service or a niche market or some other way where you specialize rather than going for the mass market. The third thing, which we talked about already, is partnering. That's a very big thing that's happening now, and that's actually taking advantage of the changes rather than saying, okay, we need to, it's a threat or a risk. Partner and take advantage of the opportunities that are there. Create great experiences for your customers and clients, because it's easy to outsource products to China and services to India, but the things that you can't outsource are experiences, even though some of that is happening, but make sure that you can create great experiences. And the last thing is just pivot. And pivot just means change your business angle slightly, either to avoid the threats, or I would prefer to take advantage of the opportunities. So there may be something that you're doing now that if you just change slightly or you had a slightly different angle, you might be able to take advantage of this Asian century and these people who are our nearest neighbors. Okay, so just before we finish up, what will you do? So I'm really interested to know what sort of things have you come up with? What sort of ideas have you come up with that you might be able to take away? Either quick ideas, things that you might do in the next couple of weeks, or things that might be longer term projects for you. Okay, so somebody says contact David. So definitely, so David Thomas is thinkglobal.com.au. So definitely do that. Yeah, good. Discuss the prospect of education with my Australian partners. Fantastic. That's really good, because I think education is a big market. China, by the way, is also trying to be an education exporter because they want to tap into other parts of Asia as well. Trisha's second name again. So Trisha Carter. In fact, I'm going to just type that in the question box. Trisha Carter. Send to all. Yeah, so someone says longer term, consider getting into conference presenting in Asia, which is fantastic. Okay, and somebody else here, I'm keeping all these anonymous, is a 90-day project. So you get your marketing message to be less locally focused and reach into the Asian market. Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a really great idea to the person who said that. So the people who are thinking of booking me as a conference speaker, this is sort of stuff I talk about. I know there's some people here who've already seen me speak at conferences. My Fast, Flat and Free presentation is about exactly this. It's about the future. It's about what's changing in the world, and it's about strategy. I also talk about innovation and collaboration. So if you're interested in innovation in your organization, and if you're interested in collaborating more within your teams, within your business and even with the other people in your industry, then my Bright Sparks presentation talks about that. And I also talk about leadership. So one of the things that's really important is for leaders to be able to not just be head down in their daily day-to-day work, but be able to look ahead and be able to think ahead. So this is one of my presentations, which is a thinking ahead presentation, is to help leaders at every level of your organization be looking forward as well as be leading the people that they've already got. So if you're interested, then find out more at gihanpereira.com. You can email me there. And also just a reminder, complete the exit survey when you leave. So as soon as this webinar finishes very soon, then there'll be an exit survey which will ask you to complete before you leave. And then I'll send you the copy of the recording as well.